Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, I'll let Steve go into it a little bit more detail, but
Sorry,
I'm not sure
who's
why it's
speaking?
titled this, but who ate all the bloody Kit Kats?
Is that right, Stephen?
That's right.
A brief history of the Loch Ness monster.
Wow.
So, I guess, without further ado, I will introduce Steve Parsons, an investigator and researcher of ghosts, hauntings, and related human experiences. Author of 3 books and numerous published articles on ghosts, ghost hunting, and related subjects, cited or referenced in many more. A regular speaker at conferences and conventions throughout the UK, Ireland, and the USA. In front of camera presenter and behind the scenes advisor on numerous paranormal documentary shows for UK and overseas broadcast networks, including the Discovery Network, National Geographic, the BBC, ITV, etc. Also, Canadian, Japanese, and US TV networks. Appeared and advised on popular paranormal edutainment TV shows, including Most Haunted, I'm Famous and Frightened, and Paranormal Investigation Live. Hosted and co-hosted radio shows for the BBC and other broadcasters. So I think you'll agree that's an incredibly impressive CV, Steve. And without further ado,
But wait, there is a further ado because we've been calling him Steve, but Stephen's his name, isn't it? Which do you prefer, Stephen or Steve?
I do apologise.
The only person that's ever called me Stephen is my mother when I'm in trouble.
Oh, okay, because that's what you put on your books, though, isn't it, normally?
It is, because it sounds posher. And in fact, a little plug, there are 2 books coming out this year, both authored by me. One is a complete revision and update of Ghostology, which is due out this year, and is the title won't change, but it's working title is Ghostology 2, but it's not a sequel, it's a revision. And the other one is a brand new book because when I was touting around the guidance notes for the SPR, which they had me write in 2018, we were getting an awful lot of questions relating to equipment, which is only covered briefly in the guidance notes, which tend to deal more with the ethics and practice of the investigation. And so the SPR said to me last year, we need another set of guidance notes to cover equipment use. Can you produce one? And that's going off to be printed very soon. They haven't yet realized it's massively over the word count, because I can never do anything properly by halves. So watch out for 2 more books coming out this year.
Thank you very much indeed. And
you said plugging it, but this has got absolutely nothing at all to do with ghosts. This is, as the title says, who ate all the bloody Kit Kats. And I'm talking so I can try and figure out how to screen share. If I press the green, where trouble last
hang
time
on
I
a
did
sec.
it.
Hang on. We've got a problem here. Right. Okay. Advanced share options. No, we don't want that. We want to make Steve co-host.
Otherwise, you won't see any pretty pictures.
And I'm not at all well tonight, so you'll have to forgive me being a complete idiot. There you go, Steve. You can now share.
Okie dokie. Right. I can screen share. Now, I got this wrong last time. Do I press play on the presentation before I share the screen or after I share the screen?
It makes no difference, really. None at all.
Does it not? Let me just try and press.
Try pressing play first.
Hang on. No, that didn't work. I need to escape out because it's there's the play options up there. Play in window. There you go. Right, now go back down to there. Sorry about this. As you can say, I don't usually more than once share sound, and use that one. Right, you should all be seeing a pretty picture. Let me just disappear off your screens.
Right,
and you should all be seeing pretty pictures of cats. Correct? Can you all see a pretty picture of cats?
Yes,
we can.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Well, we shall progress because tonight I've been watching the ASSAP webinars with interest. I did one a while ago, which horribly overran because it was on my pet subject of infrasound, and nobody gave me a time limit. I think we got to 1 hour and 3/4 when somebody finally pulled the plug. I thought, do you know what?
3 hours 36. 3
Was
hours
it?
36. Yeah, I uploaded the recording after editing it. That's
well, there we are.
editing.
Well, there we are then. I thought to myself, do you know what? I've watched all these very, very highbrow, excellent webinars And I thought, I'm not going to even try and compete. I want to do something a little more light-hearted, a little educational, edutainable, and answer a very important question: who ate all the bloody Kit Kats? So, without further ado, let's have a little. Oh, that's the wrong one. Why is it not ever working for me? Right, yeah. Right, let's give this another go. If I press that button, will it work? Yay! There you go, because more than 80% of the Earth is covered by water. And we actually know probably more about the surface of the moon than we do about the depths of the oceans and the great inland lakes that cover our planet. It's a lovely little blue marble. Oh, stop it. Why is it doing that? Is it actually me? Because every time I press this button...
Okay, so what it probably means is that somebody's receiving notifications, possibly you, on the bottom right-hand of the screen. I'll see if it's me, just to check, but I've got my mic muted, so it shouldn't be playing. But if we can all just check for that.
It's every time I... It's not changing the slide. Or maybe we'll do it the other way. And who knows what strange, I can't remember how I changed it then, but we'll figure it out. What strange animal life forms exist, such as the previously once thought to be extinct, but now new research has revealed that it actually never was extinct, and it's not even as old as we first thought it was, the coelacanth and the seven-gilled shark. And there are also many frequent reports of strange monstrous life forms that defy explanation, that exist only beneath the surface of the ocean and also on many of the inland lakes. Such creatures, of course, are the bread and butter of YouTube sensationalists and many, many tabloid videos. So we'll have a quick tabloid video.
Number 1. A huge dragon sea monster was captured in Alaska by a group of tourists. The creature appeared after the breaking away of a massive glacier into the sea. It looked like some type of dragon serpent-like creature that surfaced the water. The massive glacier that broke off could have awoken it. Take a look at the footage.
This thing is massive. We're going to be doing some enhancements. We're going to go back and forth, reverse and forward to try and make out whatever this thing is. It almost looks like a dragon to me. You could look at that tail. Look at the tail on the back of this thing. It looks like a dragon. You see the typical humps as you would see in typical Nessie photographs, sea monsters seen around lakes.
There you go. That was your tabloid video. But one creature above all of them has captured our imagination like no other. The sea monster, the fabled legend of the ancient mariners and salty sea dogs the world over. And of all of the sea monsters and sea serpents, perhaps one above all epitomizes this most enduring mystery. So as thousands before us have done, let's go in search of the Loch Ness monster. Now, Loch Ness lies on the largest geological fault line in Europe, known as the Great Glen. It's a rift valley some 60 miles long, containing 3 large and famous lochs, or in English, lakes. Loch Lochy, there's imagination for you, isn't there? What should we call the loch? Let's call it Lochy. Lochy McLockface. Loch Oich and Loch Ness. These 3 together, with their connecting rivers, form a navigable route for all vessels between the North Sea and the Atlantic, saving many vessels from the arduous and often perilous routes around the stormy northern Scottish coast. Loch Ness is deeper than much of the North Sea and is a long, narrow inland lake, barely 1 mile wide at its widest, with an average depth exceeding 500 feet, and at its deepest is more than 800 feet. By volume, Loch Ness contains more fresh water than all of the lakes in England and Wales combined, and has as yet never been known to freeze. Loch Ness is not the largest lake in the UK. That honour goes to Loch Lomond, nor is it the deepest, which is Loch Morar at over 1,000 feet. But Loch Ness has a very special place in history and in our folklore, because it is the home of the most famous lake and sea monster in the world, Nessie. But Nessie is not alone in the UK, nor even around the world. Other British lakes and lochs also have sea monsters, including the aforementioned Loch Ness, which has many sightings to her credit. The monster there called Morag, and has also been the subject of a number of scientific surveys. Morag was first reported in 1887. Loch Ness lies in a much more remote location than Loch Ness and has few visitors, and there is no road that runs around its entire shoreline, which is the case at Loch Ness. Of course, there are other loch and lake and sea monsters around the world, including all along the eastern seaboard of the New England coast, particularly around Gloucester and Cape Ann. However, that's entirely another story. So we're going to keep going and we'll go back to Loch Ness. The first recorded account of the creature in and around Loch Ness is an account of an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with the Irish saint, St. Columba, who was travelling around Scotland on his holidays, converting the native Pictish people to Christianity in the 6th century. As his party waited to cross the River Ness, Columba ordered one of his monks to swim across to the other bank in order to fetch a boat. And it's well documented that saints, like cats, hate water. As the monk reached the halfway point, a gigantic monster suddenly surfaced and rushed at the man, roaring in a most frightening way. Columba cried out to the creature, I'm not going to do the Scottish accent on this occasion, "Go no further, nor touch that man, go back." The monster stopped dead, as if pulled with ropes. It turned, it submerged and fled. Columba's men and the Picts gave thanks for what they perceived as a miracle. The account, which I've just read, is documented in the Life of St. Columba, which was written more than 1400 years ago, and is the first mention of the monster. It should be noted that the encounter does not actually take place in Loch Ness itself, but in the River Ness, which flows from the north, the northern entrance to the loch into the North Sea. In 2013, researchers at the British Library found a hitherto unknown account of Nessie, which was written down in the 12th century. The story related to a man called Walter of Bingham, who died in 1197. Walter was a minor cleric who was unable to fulfill his vow to go on crusade, so instead he made several pilgrimages to holy sites in Scotland. I don't know if that's more arduous, actually. As he travelled, he wrote an account of his journey. The manuscript had long been neglected, but when researchers finally began to examine it, they made an astonishing discovery. Walter's account with Nessie came one summer evening as he approached the banks of Loch Ness. Seeking safe passage across the river, Walter asked a group of fishermen who were mending the nets if they would row him across. Presumably being another saint, he didn't like the water much. But they rejected his request with terror. Walking downstream, he encountered a young boy dragging his coracle along the shore and asked him for safe passage across the river. Hesitating at first, the boy agreed to row Walter across in return for a silver coin. They crossed the river without mishap, but as he watched the boy rowing the coracle back to the other shore, a great beast suddenly erupted from below the waters, uttered an almighty roar, and then dragged the coracle and its unhappy occupant beneath the waves. Once again, this account takes place in the River Ness and not in the loch itself. And it does give light to the often told legend that the creature has not caused any harm to anyone after its encounter with St. Columba, because this account is actually dated 600 years after the St. Columba story. The previously unknown account of the Loch Ness monster is actually incredibly significant. Traditionally, the monster has always been depicted in serpentine form, often having humps that protrude above the water. The beast drawn by Walter, however, much more closely resembles a gigantic bear. Although they are now extinct, in the remote regions of 12th century Scotland, the presence of a surviving population of large bear, such as the grizzly, is not entirely unexpected and actually has some support from animal bone finds. Whether Walter encountered a bear or some unknown monster His account adds to the thousands of stories and tales that have fascinated people and driven researchers to spend entire lifetimes in search of the truth of the Loch. Since Walter's encounter, Nessie has been seen many times, but has, since that one occasion, never harmed anybody, or at least not that we know of. Although there were other early sightings, these were only sporadically reported, mostly passing by word of mouth over the centuries, and we must all therefore question their reliability. However, things changed during the 19th and 20th centuries. Reports of Nessie have been more frequently reported, and these reports began to be more circulated more widely by the growing newspaper industry. Amongst the very first of these was a sighting that occurred in 1872 by Mr. D. Mackenzie. The report took the form of a letter written to Rupert Gould, who was one of the first to investigate reports of a monster in Loch Ness. The letter was written in 1934 and was originally excluded from Gould's study, together with a number of other reports he had received, which had occurred prior to 1923, due to the amount of time that had elapsed between the sighting and the reporting. Gould was also aware that some of the reports may have been influenced by reports that had begun to appear in newspapers during the previous year. Quoting from the report, "I saw it in about 1872, as near as I can remember now. I was on the rock above a bracken, collecting bracken in October, when I saw what I took to be a log of wood coming across the loch from the Aldori side. The water was very calm at the time. I expected it to go down the loch towards the River Ness. When it reached the middle of the loch, however, it suddenly appeared to come to life, and it seemed to me to look exactly like an upturned boat, and went at great speed, wriggling and churning up the water in the direction of Urquhart Castle. It was about 12 o'clock on a grand sunny day, so that it was impossible for me to be mistaken that it was an animal of some sort, and I have told this same story to many friends before the present monster became famous." The monster's fame that Mackenzie's referring to actually comes about following a spate of sightings the previous year in 1933. And that year marked the completion of a new road along the north shore of Loch Ness. This new construction giving an unobstructed view along great swathes of the shore, as it was now free from trees and dense vegetation that had grown up along the existing southern shore road. Chronologically, the first of these sightings takes place in July of 1933, when George Spicer and his wife witnessed a most extraordinary creature crossing the road in front of their car as they travelled along the loch side on the newly completed northern road. On the afternoon of July the 22nd, Mr. and Mrs. Spicer were driving along the east side of Loch Ness in Scotland, and it was between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The couple was somewhere approximately halfway between doors and foyers, and they were climbing a slight incline when an extraordinary creature crossed the road in front of their car from left to right. It was only in view for a couple of seconds, but it practically took up the whole of the road as it crossed. The location where the Spicers presumed would have been the head was already across the road before they had time to take in the whole shape properly. The skin they described as being of a greyish colour, like a dirty elephant or a rhinoceros. The body of the creature was large and thick, and it moved across the road in a series of jerks. A long tentacle, which was presumed to be the neck, stretched towards the right of the road and in the direction of the lake, which was about 40 feet downslope from the road. The apparent neck undulated up and down, twisting in a series of half loops before vanishing into the shrubbery at the side of the road. There were no visible legs of any sort, nor a tail, but where the body sloped down to the start of the neck, about 4 or 5 feet above the roadway, the Spicers saw something flopping up and down, which Mr. Spicer later thought was the end of a long tail swung around the body. Spicer wrote a letter in the following days to the Inverness Courier, which was published on August the 4th that year. The story was quickly picked up by the national press. When interviewed the following year by Rupert Gould, George Spicer added that the letter was written in haste and that he had endeavoured not to exaggerate or overdo the details. Gould inspected the road for himself and the surrounding area before concluding that whereas Spicer had estimated the size of the creature to be around 8 feet in length, it was likely to be much larger, closer to 25 feet overall. 1933 also saw the very first photograph of Nessie. The blurred image claimed to show an object or creature of considerable dimensions making a big splash on the surface of the loch. It had apparently been taken by a local man, Hugh Gray, as he walked back from church along the loch shore. However, later analysis of the picture showed that it was in fact most likely to be a picture of his Labrador dog carrying a stick in its mouth. Now this actually, if I enhance the picture, you might actually see as it enhances and reveals itself to be a picture of a Labrador carrying a stick in its mouth. I'll just pause a moment so that everybody can see the Labrador. There were a number of other reports that same year which prompted the Daily Mail in December of 1933 to hire Marmaduke Wetherell, the famous big game hunter, to come and track down and hopefully capture the creature. Within just a short time, Wetherell claimed to have found several footprints in the mud on the lake shore. He said that they undoubtedly belonged to a very powerful animal, about 20 feet in length. Unfortunately, when the prints and casts of the prints were examined by zoologists from the Natural History Museum, it was quickly discovered that these footprints were that of a hippopotamus. Each of the footprints was also identical, showing either Nessie had hopped along when out of the water, or else that a single foot had made all of the prints. Notwithstanding the lack of any known native hippopotamus in the north of Scotland, it was discovered that Wetherell possessed a very fine example of a hippo foot ashtray stand, a memento of one of his many hunting expeditions to Africa, and it fitted the footprints exactly and perfectly. Wetherell withdrew in disgrace, blaming the newspaper for setting up the whole thing. Even today, actually, it's still not entirely clear who perpetrated the hoax, or if Wetherell was the perpetrator or merely another of the gullible victims. The following year, 1934, Nessie hits the headline again. On April 21st, the Daily Mail published a photograph supposedly taken by London surgeon Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson. The picture became known and has still known to this day as the surgeon's photograph and has become the most famous of all of the pictures of Nessie. According to Dr. Wilson, he took the picture early in the morning of April the 19th as he drove along the northern shore of the loch. He noticed something moving on the water and grabbed his camera, quickly snapping 4 photographs. Only 2 of the pictures came out clearly. The first reportedly shows a small head and back. The second shows a similar head in a diving position. The first photo became the well-known picture, the one that you can see on the screen, the very famous surgeon's photograph. The second attracted very little publicity because it was so blurry. The photograph's scale was immediately controversial, and it's often shown cropped, making the creature seem large and the ripples appear like waves. Whilst the uncropped shot shows the other side of the loch with the monster in the centre. The ripples in the photo fit the size and pattern of the small ripples and did not appear to be the same as the large waves when photographed up close. For years, skeptics were increasingly sure that the picture was a hoax, but it wasn't until 1984 when Stuart Campbell analysed the pictures for the British Journal of Photography that the suggestion of the picture being a hoax was finally confirmed. His conclusion was that the object could only really have been a foot or 2 in length at most, and he suggested it could have been some sort of seabird or perhaps a marine animal. Of course, we all now know the truth. The monster was a model head and neck stuck on a toy submarine. Christian Sperling, one of the perpetrators, actually revealed the true story and the events leading up to the creation of the photograph before his death in 1993. Sperling was the godson of Marmaduke Weatherall and revealed that Weatherall had put together the elaborate hoax as a revenge for the hippo foot episode the year before. The story is now well known and needs no further telling, but even today, that iconic photograph, the surgeon's photograph, is the one that most people will still associate with the Loch Ness Monster. Despite the hoaxes, the number of reports continued to increase throughout 1934 and 1935. More and more people came forward, all claiming to have seen Nessie. Thousands travelled to the loch, hoping to see the monster for themselves. But by 1938, interest in Nessie was beginning to wane. However, interest was rekindled that year when South African tourist Mr. G.E. Taylor managed to capture almost 3 minutes of cine film, the very first moving pictures of Nessie. The film was sent to Maurice Burton, a writer for Popular Science magazine, who, after conducting an analysis, managed to lose the film. A single still from the movie survived and was published, together with his conclusion that the object, whatever it was just some floating object and not an animal. And he published that in his 1961 book, The Elusive Monster. As a footnote, in 2010, the Scottish National Archives released a letter from the Chief Constable of Inverness-shire, which he had penned in 1938. He stated that he had no doubt that the creature existed, but he had grave concerns for his ability to protect Nessie from monster hunters after apprehending a party of would-be monster hunters armed with harpoon guns, all set determined to capture the monster dead or alive. Now, at this point, I could just continue to talk about the numerous sightings. In fact, so numerous that in 2018, Nessie actually appeared on one of the British 10-pence alphabet coins, unsurprisingly, L for Loch Ness. By the 1960s, more than 4,000 separate sightings had been recorded. Of course, many of these were the result of mistaken identity. Loch Ness and the River Ness, of course, frequented by seals. Even the occasional dolphin has been known to swim into the loch from the sea, presumably using the secret underwater tunnels which are used by Nessie and the occasional alien undersea vehicle, although there are skeptics who would probably argue that point. Just briefly, it's also worth mentioning the tunnels, which are supposed to join Loch Ness to the North Sea and which have often been proposed as the means by which Nessie enters and exits the loch. Sadly, sonar surveys have demonstrated that these tunnels don't exist. A series of high-resolution underwater side-scan sonar surveys have found absolutely no evidence for their existence now or at any time in the past. Moreover, as the surface of Loch Ness is over 50 feet above sea level, their presence would mean that the loch would be considerably smaller, as most of it wouldn't by now have drained back into the North Sea. In 1960, an intriguing piece of film evidence did turn up, taken by legendary monster hunter and aerospace engineer Tim Dinsdale. The film was shot from an elevated vantage point close to Aleister Crowley's former house at Boleskine, overlooking the loch. Let's have a quick look at it. Obviously, this was in the days before video and they didn't have sound. The scene showing the boat, Dinsdale actually arranged for a local boatman to take his boat through the area for a scale shot. The film was later analysed by experts from the Royal Air Force Photographic Interpretation Unit, who after considerable work concluded that whatever it was not a boat and that there was a substantial portion of the object remaining beneath the water. Now, for the sake of time, I must put to one side the thousands of reports by individuals and groups from tourists, monster hunters, and local residents. Else, it's going to be a repeat of the infrasound talk, and we're going to sit in here all night and probably for much of the rest of the week. So we're just going to focus, take a few minutes to focus on some of the more intensive and interesting searches for the creature. Down the years, the search for Nessie has attracted a number of scientific studies, in addition to those already mentioned searches by Gould and Marmaduke Weatherall. In 1934, an expedition was organised by Sir Edward Mountain. Sir Edward financed a watch of the loch employing 20 men with binoculars and cameras. The men were positioned around the loch from 9 o'clock to 6 p.m. daily for 5 weeks. A total of 21 photographs were taken during that time. None were considered to be conclusive. The most extensive search that has ever been carried out was undertaken by the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau. The search, which commenced on January the 1st, 1962, ran for 10 years until 1972. During this time, hundreds of volunteers manned a series of fixed mobile cameras positioned around the loch. The Bureau was established by Sir Peter Scott, the naturalist and son of the great Antarctic explorer, one of my personal heroes, together with a Member of Parliament, David James, and the author Constance White. Scott became interested in the mystery after reading White's book, The Loch Ness Monster. Under their control, an extensive series of camera searches and watches of the loch were conducted, several of which resulted in pictures, some of which remain unexplained to this day. In addition to the numerous fixed and mobile cameras, the Bureau carried out several underwater surveys of the loch using sonar and manned submersibles. And during more than a decade of searching, the LNIB made use of aerial searches, infrared cameras, and powerful search lights which illuminated the loch at night. They also captured a number of movies, the most intriguing being this grainage footage shot at extreme range of an object moving at speed, seemingly beneath the surface of the loch. It was taken in 1967 by volunteer Dick Rayner. Analysis at the time failed to explain it. A pleasure steamer appears towards the end of the clip. The sighting takes place just as the film spool in the camera was almost used up. So let's have a quick look at this film. Now, later on, Dick Rayner became much less certain that the film showed the monster, but remains uncertain as to what it might actually be. During one of my visits up to Loch Ness, I had the pleasure of spending several hours with Dick and going out on his boat with him. And we were talking about the film, and he'd shown us a copy of the film. And we showed him a video that we'd taken. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it. I was searching everywhere for it. It's on a disc somewhere put away, which shows several small water birds running across, as they try to get airborne. And the similarity was really quite striking. And Dick had actually said, after seeing the video, that was one of the things that he had gone back afterwards and reconsidered after seeing the same bird pattern, the way the birds take off. And he himself was inclined towards that direction of thinking, that what he'd actually captured was one, perhaps two or three birds sort of running to get airborne across the surface of the loch. Perhaps the most conclusive evidence that was collected by the LNIB actually comes from the sonar surveys, beginning with several large contacts that were observed in both 1962 and the 1968 sonar surveys. The continued lack of any substantial evidence other than the sonar data finally caused the Bureau to run out of funding, and they ceased in 1972. The next major attempt to capture evidence for the existence of Nessie takes place during 1972, just as the LNIB were winding up, and was conducted by the Academy of Applied Science from Boston, New England, under the direction of Dr. Robert Rines. Using advanced underwater photography, Rines and his team caused quite a stir by announcing that their equipment had captured an image of the creature underwater. The photograph apparently showed a flipper-like object, which Rines was convinced was the diamond-shaped flipper of a plesiosaur. It did take quite some enhancement for the flipper to be seen, so we'll just enhance it. You can see what I mean. Accompanying Rines was a cameraman from WYCN TV 13, Nashua, New Hampshire, who managed to capture footage of a 40-foot long V-shaped wake traveling at speed across the loch. Unfortunately, due to commercial reasons and sensitivities, that footage has never been made available, although a segment was apparently used in a documentary, and I'm blowed if I've ever found it. Rines returned in 1975 with even more equipment, and it wasn't long before the new equipment produced even more startling results. This time, a series of pictures showing the entire creature. Peter Scott, together with Rines, used that photograph as the main basis for a formal description of the Loch Ness Monster in Nature magazine, naming it as a new species which they called Nessiteris rhombopteryx. The name was based on the ancient Greek for the monster of Ness with the diamond-shaped fin. It was later pointed out by the Daily Telegraph that the name was actually an anagram of monster hoax by Sir Peter S. Nessie researcher Robert Rines responded by pointing out that the letters could also be read as an anagram for, yes, both pics are monsters. In 1975, Rines also produced several photographs which purported to show a close-up view of Nessie's face peering into the camera lens, a kind of Loch Ness Monster selfie. Rines' photograph caused quite a lot of researchers a great deal of concern. The level of enhancement that had been applied and the manner in which the underwater cameras were secured to the loch bed caused some to suggest that the camera had been prone to tilting as a result of wave action, and that the images might be merely ordinary objects on the loch floor. Moreover, they pointed out that the dark peat-laden waters of the loch meant that it was impossible for the camera to see more than about 10 feet. So the picture that claimed to show the entire creature, more than 20 feet in length, was obviously impossible. The skeptics were in fact correct, because in 1987, members of Operation Deep Scan located a large tree stump on the loch floor directly beneath the point where Rines had moored his camera. The tree stump object bore an uncanny resemblance to the gargoyle's face. Moreover, the large stump also bore a striking resemblance to the full-length picture of the monster. The team nicknamed the large tree stump the Stumposaurus. Rines died in 2009, aged 87, and he was still convinced that a large creature lurked beneath the waters of Loch Ness. And he may be right in that conviction, because despite the failure of his photographic efforts, he also conducted a number of intensive sonar surveys of the loch. And what's interesting and intriguing is that every single sonar survey that he carried out recorded contacts with large moving objects at great depth. And this simple, really inescapable fact leads credence to the many sightings and reports that continue to be received annually right up to the present day. In 1987, the largest, we've got to see the Stumposaurus first. There it is. There's an underwater shot taken by Dick Rayner from a camera dangled off the back of his boat, as I remember. In 1987, the largest ever sonar survey of Loch Ness was carried out by Operation Deep Scan under the direction of Adrian Shine, a lifelong investigator and veteran of the LNIB, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, and the Rines investigations. 24 boats were used, each fitted with a powerful sonar sweep, and they did a line sweep the length of the loch, and that was repeated several times. As was the case with the Rhine sonar survey and those conducted by the LNIB and various others, Operation Deep Scan produced a series of large moving deep water contacts. The sonar operators and the manufacturers' agents who were there offering technical support were certain that these were not fish shoals, underwater debris, or some other anomaly caused by underwater changes in the water density. Moreover, Deep Scan also used calibrated standard spherical targets to ensure the reliability and the accuracy of the sonar equipment. Rhines had taken similar precautions with his sonar survey, which had been conducted under the control of a team of scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The sonar evidence is actually quite remarkable in that it could be said to be repeatable evidence for something large and animate beneath the waters of Loch Ness. Interestingly, to date, there has not been a single sonar survey conducted of Loch Ness that has failed to produce one or more of these intriguing contacts. They mostly occur at night and in the mid-water levels, although they have occurred closer to the surface or at depth close to the bottom. Currently, there is a plan that was due to be put into effect last year during 2020 to repeat Operation Deep Scan using an advanced series of towed array side scan sonars, but obviously you know what happened in 2020. Meanwhile, other researchers have turned to the internet to assist their search for the creature. In 2015, a Swedish researcher claimed that Nessie could be seen in a satellite photograph used by Apple Maps and Google Earth. The image apparently shows a large submerged object that is producing a small wake as it moves through the water. Comparisons with other images taken by the satellite as it passed showed the object, whatever it was, to be moving slowly and on an undulating course. The satellite images also show the many boats that ply the loch daily and allowed researchers to make comparisons between those boats and the unknown object, and the researchers concluded that they were distinctly different. In fact, it continues up to the present day. We heard about the postponed 2020 Deep Scan 2 survey, but in September 2019, it was announced to great trumpeting that a team of scientists from New Zealand had completed a study of the DNA of all of the creatures living in Loch Ness in the hopes of discovering the creature. Their results failed to show any monster DNA, presumably because we haven't got any to compare it against, but it did show the existence of several species of fish that were previously not known to inhabit the loch, including the Pacific salmon, and revealed a considerable amount of unknown DNA. So it's throwing a lifeline there to the supporters of Nessie. Click. Did that work? No. It also managed to rule out many of the popular theories surrounding the beast, that it was a sturgeon or a catfish. They were ruled out. The scientists concluded by suggesting that Nessie may in fact be some type of large eel, pointing at the very large amounts of eel DNA they found in their samples. If anyone has considered what might happen if you did ever find or capture Nessie, well, the Scottish government has. They've considered it, and for many years a plan has existed, drawn up by the Scottish Parliament, that details exactly what should happen in that eventuality. And at a conference set up to discuss the DNA experiments, the Scottish First Minister, another sturgeon, revealed that she believed that the monster existed and reiterated the plan first drawn up in 2001 to protect the creature and its habitat. Now, I could keep going on ad infinitum. I'm just watching the clock. I haven't mentioned the McLean and Anderson investigation of 1954, or the Birmingham.
Go as long as you want. Honestly, keep going.
All right. No, I want to end. or the Birmingham University studies of 61, 68, and 69, or Oxford and Cambridge University's study in 1962, Vickers Marine survey in 1969, Plessy Electronics the same year in 1969. Or even the Griffiths Foundation again in 1969. It was a very popular year. But with so many investigators and expeditions, what I thought we would do is we would start to wind up by describing another investigation, because I too have investigated Loch Ness. In fact, down for the years, I've spent about 6 weeks on the side of Loch Ness. It started off, I had the opportunity to go up there. It didn't have internet, and it seemed like a good break for a week to go and enjoy the scenery and to to try and get my own personal understanding of the location. And like all good tourists, I took some photographs while I was there, and that's me looking for the Loch Ness monster. Some more shots there of that's known as the Great Horseshoe. That's a rock formation that's featured in a number of Nessie sightings. It's on the opposite side of Loch Ness to Castle Urquhart, and is one of the landmarks that's used when orientating oneself on Loch Ness. Continuing, that's well, I'm inside the boat. That's when we went out with Dick Rayner on one of his trips around. He runs on Nessie Hunter, and that's another trip out on Loch Ness that we took. Just showing off there with the holiday snaps. And of course, if you wonder what it looks like from the shore, we'll come to that in a minute. These are just a couple of more pictures of the view. That's up by Urquhart Castle, looking to the north, up to the exit of the River Ness. That's Urquhart Bay on the left-hand side of the screen. That's from the top end of Loch Ness. And the weather at Loch Ness isn't always that clement. And that, believe it or not, was taken around this time of year. It was taken in the spring. Spring's actually a very good time to go Nessie hunting. It's when proportionally the number of sightings are at the highest. It's also when the loch's at its flattest and smoothest, although on that occasion it wasn't. That's what it more often looks like at that time of year. You can see it's almost mirror flat. You've got these low mists that roll down the loch. That was taken. We took rent of a shoreside property that was actually used as the base for the movie where they made the big model that sank to the bottom of the loch, and this was the dive base. It was available to rent through one of the agencies up there, and we took the whole of the parascience up there for a week and had them break from the tradition of ghost hunting. And we took them monster hunting at Loch Ness, interspersed with, because Loch Ness isn't very far from Culloden and Cawdor Castle. And we saw boats going up and down the Loch Ness on a regular basis during the 6 weeks that I've been up there. And we saw the wakes of the boats as they. And what was interesting for me personally was that at no time, I'm not someone who is sort of a boaty type. I don't spend my life looking at water, but at no time, I mean, we saw boats, we saw seals, we saw boat wakes, we saw wind and current effects, and at no time were we ever for a moment fooled or tricked into considering that any of these were anything other than what they were. Because of Loch Ness being relatively narrow at its widest, it's around a mile. You do get some interesting boat wake effects. So the boat will go past and it will be 20 minutes before you get the shore wake. And then you get this returning wake that comes bouncing off the sides and travels up behind the boat about 20 minutes after the boat has long since disappeared. One of the shots, this is a shot taken from where Dinsdale took his shot. We've superimposed the video onto it. It was a bit difficult lining it up perfectly. It is at the start, but as Dinsdale pans around. But this was taken from where he took his view. We're up in the very haunted churchyard just beneath Boleskine, which is probably more famously haunted than Boleskine House itself with the locals. most of whom say they won't go there at night. But it does give you it's about a 250-foot drop almost vertically down to the loch itself, and is a fantastic viewpoint to go monster hunting, because you certainly can't go to Blessing because somebody's burnt it down. Before we continue, we spent many days. We found and if anybody is thinking of going to Loch Ness, there is a superb vantage point at a place called Inverfarigig on the North Shore. It's a bit of a drive to get to it. There's got some very interesting bends and some very steep slopes, but there's an old railway pier, because back in the late Victorian era up to the 1930s, Loch Ness, the small communities living along the northern shore of the loch, were serviced by a steamer that went up and down the loch. And they had this series of small piers, many of which have now become derelict. But at Inverfarigig, there's just enough of it left sticking out, mostly supported out of railway tracks and sleepers, to give you a fantastic 180-degree panorama north-south across the loch. You're looking from the north to the south shore of the loch. The River Ness and Inverness is to your right, and Fort William is to your left. But I've got to address a couple of other of the most often cited objections to the existence of some large aquatic creature in the loch. The first being a lack of substantial food for this predator, or more accurately, a large family of predators, as unless Nessie is immortal, in reality, according to folklore, it might be, as with all animals, it must age and die and be replaced by fresh specimens. The basis of the food problem has always presumed that the animal is a carnivore. If, however, the creature is a vegetarian, or even predominantly a Vegisaurus, then there is ample food in the loch in the form of aquatic life, plant life, to sustain a sizable population of these creatures. Another problem that the critics like to throw up regularly is that the number of sightings have decreased massively in the last 30 years, which they explain as the result of good work debunking the myth and educating those who would previously have claimed a sighting. It is true the number of sightings that are reported has fallen year on year, and in recent years there have been only a handful of reports received every year. But this has got to be tempered by the fact that the local authority has planted extensively along both shores of the loch. The great wave of sightings in the 1930s occurred following the opening of the new road along the North Shore, not because it offered vantage points overlooking Loch Ness's hiding places, but the road construction resulted in great swathes of the loch becoming visible. 80 years later, though, the trees and the vegetation have now grown back, and for many miles on either bank road, so North Road or South Road, it is almost impossible to obtain more than a glimpse of the water through the dense foliage as you drive along. In addition, the Highways Authority has become aware of the high number of accidents that it identified as being caused by drivers erratically looking at the loch rather than where they were going and bumping into one another. And in response to that, a program of tree planting and non-cutting of the existing vegetation was undertaken along both sides of the loch, except for a handful of designated viewing places. The other factor that affects the number of sightings is that there isn't nowhere for people to report their sightings. Up until about 15 years ago, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau maintained a sighting register at several sites along the loch, in addition to its exhibition at Drumnadrochit. There is now this is no longer the case, and people turning up at the exhibition centre wishing to tell someone of their own sightings are now politely turned away. These days, you will find nowhere to record your sighting except a few internet sites that are not linked and do not collaborate. There is really only one option if you want to take your story in pictures, and that's to go to one of the daily newspapers, who are always eager for another Nessie story for their readers. And there was an example of this, I think just last month or the month before. But if you talk to the locals, as I did, one of the things that struck me is these locals, these people who work on the side of the loch or travel along the roads, live in houses overlooking the loch, they see the loch every single day. And many, many, many of them have got their own personal sightings that they don't talk about, they don't report, they just accept it as being one of those things. And many of the visitors and tourists, if you talk to the cafe owners and the gift shop proprietors, people do still come in and describe their own experiences of the monster. They come in trying desperately to, who do I tell? Who can I tell about this? This is currently the exhibition centre where you will be politely turned away if you do try to go and say, I've seen the monster on Loch Ness. And this was one of the more recent, this is a 2018 sighting, young girl Charlotte Robinson on her first holiday day with her parents. And she did what all good Nessie hunters now have to do, which is to rush to the daily newspapers. Charlotte took the photograph. It had a head and neck and it was the shape of a hook. I just took what I saw. It was black. I don't know how far it was out of the water. I'm not good at judging distances. As a father of an 11-year-old, I know that to be perfectly true. Well, that concludes the main bulk of the story. This is, there she is, missed her again. But I've got to answer one important question. Who ate all the bloody Kit Kats? And surprised nobody's piped up to now to ask me why that was included in the title. Well, during one of my trips up to Loch Ness, my friend and traveling companion on this particular trip, we were up there for a week and we loaded the car each morning on the road to Invercargill. We loaded it with all the necessary Nessie hunting equipment, the big tripods and the binoculars and the long-range video cameras, and a healthy supply of snacks and food to keep us going throughout the day. And we went up on this particular morning. We'd been to Invercargill, and then to kill a few hours, we went to see Steve Feltham. Now, this is a gentleman who went up like we did as a youngster to go and see Loch Ness, fell in love with it, decided he was going to sell up and buy an old converted camping van, library, parked it on the north shore of the loch, and has remained there ever since, to this day. He exists on money which he gets from media productions. He does some odd jobs around the village, and he makes little cute plaster of Paris resin monsters, which he sells to the gullible tourists. Well, we visited Steve on a number of days, and we'd grown quite friendly. We'd met him the year before as well, and we were there. The tourists had disappeared. You can see there's no leaves on the trees. You can tell what time of year it is, and the four of us were the three of us were left alone and looking at the monster. Steve had gone inside to make a cup of tea, and I said to my traveling companion, we've got some Kit Kats in the back of the car. Go and see if Steve wants one. So we drank our tea, and we stared at the loch from the vantage point in the bay where Steve set up his caravan. And then we set off back down the road to Invercargill for our afternoon and evening shift, because Nessie is always, well, not always, but the best times to see Nessie are supposedly just after first light and in the hour or so before darkness, so dawn and dusk. So we'd spent the day with Steve, and we headed back for the evening shift at Invercargill. And whilst there, we decided it was a lovely evening. You can see the remains of the pier. Really do go there if you're ever up at Loch Ness. That is the spot. And we went into the boot of the car, and I said, we'll have a nice cup of tea and a Kit Kat. So Stuart put down his binoculars, telescope, and headed to the back of the car, put the kettle on. I went to the boot of the car and reached in and rummaged around in the boot and discovered the Kit Kats, which we'd brought with us. This was day 2 of the trip. We had brought a 48 pack catering pack of Kit Kats, which we thought would be enough for 2 people to last the 9 days we were going to be there. And there were 2 in the bottom of the box, which led to the question, who ate all the bloody Kit Kats? And Stuart looked a bit shifty, and I thought, you cannot have eaten 46 Kit Kats since yesterday. That's not possible. I've been with you the whole time. You haven't been sick. You haven't been ill. Where have all the Kit Kats gone? And Stuart looked at me and he went, oh, you told me to give them to Steve. Well, no, I told you to give Steve a Kit Kat. You've given Steve all of our Kit Kats. Well, I thought you told me to. So, Steve Feltham ate all our Kit Kats, all 46 of the bloody things, courtesy of my good friend, Stuart. So that solves that particular mystery of where did all the Kit Kats go. There we are, ladies and gentlemen. I shall now stop screen searching. And we've solved that particular mystery. And how do you stop screen? So, how do you do this? No, I have no idea. Anybody know how we stop screen sharing? I don't know. Are we actually, am I still sharing the screen? No, there we go, because CJ is. All right, well, there we go. Any questions?
Thank you, Steve. That was really, really good. Very edutaining. Thank you so much. It was a great talk.
Well, I thought it'd be different than the usual highbrow talks that these webinars have become famous for. I would do something distinctly lowbrow.
Well, it was very interesting and something a little bit different. So it was, I mean, I found it fascinating personally. We have got a couple of questions and a few little statements, so I'll just go through them. So Randy Liebeck has said, wouldn't it be marvellous if a large-scale effort along the lines of the LNIB could be recreated today using the 4K video cameras, thermal images, etc.?
Do you know, it would. And I think there is one of the things that struck me most about my time up there. The very first time I went to Loch Ness was the sheer size of the loch. I mean, we see it in photographs and we know it's 20-something miles long and we know it's big. But when you're confronted with just how big it is, and this vegetation that has been allowed and has been planted means that you don't actually, apart from perhaps Urquhart in the middle, perhaps Fort William at the southern end of the loch, you do get sort of, you don't actually see the entire loch. Even if you're standing on the high point at Fort Urquhart, at Urquhart Castle, or opposite below Boleskine House, you can see you're seeing Loch from left to right. It just streams off into the distance. You cannot see the entire loch, and it became quite apparent that you could put a nuclear submarine into Loch Ness, and because of the density of the undergrowth along the sides of the loch, most people wouldn't notice it if they were just driving to and from Fort William or Inverness. They're watching the road. It's quite a dangerous, twisty road. There's lots of traffic on it, particularly in the summer months. And there is no opportunity to glance. I mean, there were sightings in the 60s from passengers and buses because they can obviously, and the undergrowth there was much smaller. What also struck me was the sheer number of people that we spoke to, people that spend their shepherds, foresters, the guys who work on the salmon fishing farms at the northern end of Loch Ness. They've all got a monster story. They've all seen a creature in the loch. Now, these are people who know Loch Ness as well as CJ knows normal terrace. They're not going to be fooled or tricked or mistaken by upturned boats or as one researcher described it, it couldn't have been the Loch Ness monster. It was a submerged rock that people saw. Somebody pointed out if it was submerged, they probably couldn't have seen it. But there we are. And we were up there, and it was, I think, the last trip, one of the last trips we were up there, we'd been ghost hunting, and we had thermal imaging cameras with us. And we thought one of the tools that has never been tried has been thermal imaging. And I think that there is a case to answer. I genuinely believe that there is. I don't think it's a plesiosaur. And I have to say, from talking to Dick Rayner and looking at the underwater video footage from the submersible cameras that he's built, and he's had these cameras down to the 800-foot level, the one thing that strikes you at the bottom of Loch Ness is the sheer number of eels. It is just a mass of eels at the bottom of Loch Ness. From the bottom of Urquhart Bay, which is about 75, 80 foot deep, right down to the 700-800 foot level. When you get to the bottom of Loch Ness, it's just a waving mass of eels. And we know, just the other end of the River Ness, there are large conger eels that are reaching 15, 16 feet. And I believe that it's only my submission and my belief that you're dealing with something, a large aquatic eel, 20, perhaps 20 foot across in length. A small population of them that people are seeing. And I think it would be fantastic to take part in another LNIB. When I was a kid growing up, I used to watch Fife Robertson and the BBC News reporters, standing on the shore of Loch Ness in their duffel coats, with these brave guys on top of transit vans and Dodge Commas, I think they were back then, on rickety wooden platforms with huge cameras and massive ex-military surplus binoculars peering intently at the loch. And it just strikes me as being something we could do.
Okay. So, Steve, sorry, I was just going to jump in very briefly before I collapse and go back to sleep. How much would it cost to send you and your mate back up there on top of the Kit Kats?
Well, we got it down to quite cheap because we found a really nice guest house about 6 or 7 miles from Loch Ness.
You're talking what, 500 quid in petrol, aren't you, to get there and back? I mean, it's not easy. No, 100 quid. All right, 100.
That's from remotest West Wales.
Okay, yeah, from Fishguard, yeah. Okay, so you go down the A40 and you go up. So you take up a group of people. How much